John Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML. John Carpenter Show. Welcome back. It's 7:36, and I want to welcome to the show. We have a special guest, Thomas G. Del Beccaro. He's an author, the author of The Divided Era. Good morning.
Hi, how are you today? Thanks for having me on.
You're also a candidate for Senate in California. I wish you the best on that one. You're behind enemy lines.
I am behind enemy lines, and I'm even in the San Francisco Bay Area. But, you know, the Democrats have left an opening with this drought and their mismanagement of water, and I'm going to have my say and hopefully get some support. Well,
I will say it's been quite a few years since I've been out that way, but the Bay Area, politics aside, is one of the most beautiful places in the entire country. It's just stunning.
It is nice, but thankfully it's been overcast for about a month here. Haven't had much sun.
Yeah, well, okay. So let's talk a little bit about your background first. You're formerly the chairman of the California Republican Party, and you've written a couple of books before as well, right?
I have. I write for Forbes regularly. I'm a contributor there. I write for the Washington Times now and again, Daily Caller, a number of online magazines. I previously wrote a book about how tax policy essentially affects the presidential elections and the economy. And this new book, The Divided Era, which comes out today in Barnes & Noble nationwide and is on Amazon, talks about how ever larger government divides us.
Well, and I will say that does seem to be a running theme these days. I mean, it seems like the more government expands, the more divided we get. It's almost like
mathematical.
Yeah. The powers that be seem to enjoy it.
Yeah, if you think about it, everything government does takes a winner and a loser. And there's a competition for what government does. It doesn't do things blindly. We either compete in elections or we compete to stop the EPA from doing something or for the EPA to do something. And at the end of the line, there's someone who has to pay for it. And what I do with the book is I compare our three most divided eras from our past to today, the similarity being when government does big things, people divide and fight over it and fight over how to pay for it. The difference today is that government is so incredibly large, even though we're not fighting over something as big as the Civil War, there's a constant fight today, which is why I call this period in history the divided era.
Well, now let's talk a little bit about let's talk a little bit about the early days of the country, and we've always hear stories of senators getting beaten with canes and people firing their pistols in the Capitol building, and you hear all these stories of less gentlemanly discourse than you would see these days. Do you think even now, even though everybody seems like they are polite to each other, that they're that divided?
Well, as divided as in the past, I think the country as a whole is very much divided, and we're in a period where we're going to be divided for a long period of time, because the difference today versus the past is that the issues we're fighting about won't just disappear overnight, or there isn't subject to an agreement. So there was intense disagreement over whether or not to adopt the Constitution. But the Constitution was adopted, and the partisanship related to its adoption receded, and since government was very small, back then about 1.5%, 2% of the economy, people could go on with their lives. The difference is today, government is doing an incredible amount of things, from the local government to the federal government. $6 trillion a year is spent. That's over a third of the economy. And this, as I write about in the book, this competition for spoils and the competition to run government are at new heights. So today, I think the intensity and the invective is not as high as some of the things you described, but we are in a constant period of division unless we start to change some things.
Now, do you think the division and the invective, like you mentioned, do you think that is kind of filtered down from the elected officials to the populace now? I imagine the average person working in a farm in 1800 early 1800s probably wasn't as politically involved, and he certainly didn't have a 24-hour news cycle blaring all of this talk of division and argument at him.
It's interesting you picked 1820, which was the year and is the subject of the 5th chapter of the book, James Monroe running for president re-election unopposed. Indeed, government affected very little. There was no EPA, no federal regulations. First federal regulations don't come to the late 1870s. And people could live their lives. Now, the last, from Lincoln's election on, those last 40 years of the 1900s were incredibly divisive because government was doing really huge things and affecting many people's lives. But those issues resolved. We picked a currency. We fought a civil war. And those issues actually ended. The difference, again, today is the overreach of the EPA isn't ending, and it affects everybody. There's no aspect of your life that the government now doesn't touch. Again, in the past, as you mentioned, you could live in western Tennessee and almost never see government, except for perhaps during the Civil War. The difference today is the car you drive, the mattress you sleep on, the food you eat. Everything is touched by government, and there is a competition to affect how government is doing every one of those things, not to mention the tax issue.
Well, and I think the average person now knows that this is a zero-sum game, that there's only so much government largesse to hand out. I think people are starting to think, well, if I don't get mine, then I'm going to be in trouble, and somebody else that's undeserving is going to get it. And it kind of fosters that kind of zero-sum game mentality in a good part of the population.
Absolutely. I spent a considerable amount of time in the book discussing this competition for government spoils that pits Americans against Americans, and of course, the Democrat Party today talks about this issue when you have a candidate like Hillary saying she wants the top of the top 1%, or Obama saying that the 1%ers, and that always wasn't a Democrat issue, by the way. It was Teddy Roosevelt who, as a president, and even before, started to push this issue of class warfare. FDR made a similar push, saying that if we could shame the rich into saying that they haven't paid their fair share, that they could pick up 10 million votes. So what the book's a nonpartisan book. It talks about the eras and the players in each of those eras. But again, today, the difference is because there's so much government, you can't get away from it, and the competition is intense. Think about this. In 2012, the average winning senatorial candidate, U.S. senator, spent about $10 million. Yet in Iowa, they just spent $100 million. Same in North Carolina, same in Georgia, approximately. Why so much? Because to rule the Senate meant that much. And why does it mean that much? Because government and controlling government now means that much.
Yeah, well, now, and do you think there's a, and I don't want you to throw your own party under the bus, but do you think there's an element in the Republican Party that doesn't want to, and you don't have to name names or anything, but do you think there's an element that doesn't want government to get smaller? They just want to be the ones in charge of the big government.
Well, another focus of the book is providing readers an understanding of the rise of the Tea Party. Historically, third parties have risen in our country when the two major parties are not dealing with an issue. For instance, the Greenback Party rose because there wasn't a resolution of which currency to have, paper or gold or silver or coins. Today, the Tea Party arises because government is just out of control, and they don't believe that the Republicans are dealing with it, let alone the Democrats. So there's a story in the Hill newspaper today about how both parties want to go back to break the spending caps and start spending more. If that, in fact, occurs, you will see even more division. If the Republicans don't provide reform policies that clean up government and save money as opposed to simply spending, that will add more fuel to the Tea Party movement and the Liberty movement and Rand Paul movement, and you will see further division because we have a near third party that is upset about the direction of government, and that's because of it's getting larger, and they don't believe the two parties are dealing with it.
Now, do you think a third party is the answer, or do you think just taking back one of the two existing parties would be more of a workable solution?
Okay, so again, I don't in the book I don't pick sides when it comes to these things, but I do talk about the fact that the reason why you don't have a third party emerge today, a classic third party like the Populist Party once was, like the Greenback Party once was, and they got people elected, is because of the cost. The cost to run a nationwide party is enormous. When you consider that both sides in 2016 will spend over $1 billion related to the presidency alone, it's nearly impossible for a third party to do the same. Remember when Ross Perot ran during the 80s, there was a Reform Party. He ran, and in certain states, Reform Party members got elected. The odds of that happening again are diminishing because of the cost. So going forward, it's unlikely we're going to see a large third-party movement, given the current dynamic, and if the Republicans choose in the upcoming cycle to increase spending, again, I think that will increase the Tea Party or the dynamics that led to the Tea Party, and you're going to see more division.
Right. And now, just say as some strange thing happens and you manage to get elected as president in 2016 is
me or Republicans?
Or we'll just say you're a generic candidate that gets elected as president. I don't want to say you get elected, but as a generic candidate that gets elected in 2016, is there anything that could be done right away? I mean, I understand this has been 100 years in the making. It's not going to just go away overnight.
Correct.
So is there anything that the next president, the next Congress could do to start trying to corral in some of this division?
Yeah, in fact, the 10th chapter of my book, The Divided Era, is in large part devoted to that very question. It talks about the dangers, the 10th chapter does, of class warfare and how to rise above it. And the next president needs to learn from the lessons of Washington, Monroe, JFK, and Reagan, all of whom had a specific leadership skill, three of whom took the presidency during highly divided periods, and they ran on unifying goals. So what the next president needs to do is find a unifying goal, which meaning you don't get into the presidency and point to one side and say you're good and the other side you're bad. And there have been presidents that have done that essentially during their term, including the current president. You can't break division by promoting division. You can't break this divided era we're in by wanting to topple some portion of society or blame one portion of society. You got to do the opposite, and that's what I talk about in the 10th chapter.
Well, and I don't want to turn this into a session of just beating up the current president, but it at least for my unprofessional, untrained eye, seems like the current president is very good at identifying different groups that are going at each other's throats and using those against each other. I mean, all you have to do is take a look at every time there's an incidence of police violence. Perfect example. For some reason, the president of the United States getting involved in these things just seems to exacerbate the problems.
Yes, and this has happened periodically through our history. He's not it is true what you say, but he's not the worst of it. John Adams, actually enacted or signed the Aliens and Sedition Acts, which made it illegal to criticize the sitting president, and people went to jail over that. And that was highly divisive. At the time, people like Jefferson thought they were watching the end of America. Remember, America at the time is 9 years old, and there was no precedent for a long-standing republic that came together in this manner. So, yes, this president tends to pit one group against another, which, if your standard is the country unified, then Obama is not going to succeed in that fashion. He didn't come out of the box in the division that he faced and seek to bring certain groups together. For instance, the stimulus package, no Republican voted for, because really there was nothing in it for Republicans to vote for. That was a mistake. Whether you like what Bush the 43rd did or not, he came out in an even more divided period than Obama. Remember, we had the constitutional crisis, hanging chads, and the like. And really his first big piece of legislation is working with Ted Kennedy on No Child Left Behind, which smoothed things over. Obama took a different tack, and the country's been more divided ever since.
Well, and then Woodrow Wilson did almost the exact same thing with his Sedition Act as well. So there is obviously precedent for that kind of from the top division.
Some people are better leaders than others. In my view, the best ever was Washington. You'll see in the book I describe how he took over a very fractured country, but because of his unifying nature as a person, his leadership, and the goals that he set, he was able to heal America for a period of time. James Monroe didn't legislate us into differences. JFK married his political goals with the economic goals of private persons, the Americans. Reagan did the same, and they were able to heal things and get people moving in the same direction. If government is going to be less divisive going forward, we need to find a similar character in history who's going to come along and not divide us through rhetoric or policy, but try and bring us together. And chief among those is someone who's going to put in real tax reform, because using the tax policy for class warfare has never been good in history for any civilization.
Well, and we only have a few minutes before we have to wrap up, but I wanted to just touch on the tax system really quick. I mean, the tax system has always been a tool of class warfare, but it seems like every time it's changed, it becomes more and more a tool of class warfare, and that's by design, right?
Well, the income tax came out of the William Jennings Bryan, Theodore Roosevelt theme of wealth has accumulated and it was achieved, and we need to take it away from those doing that. Interestingly enough, FDR, related to the war and his spending, really broadened the base of who paid taxes. But ever since FDR, it's really narrowed to the point where we are today, where half pay and half don't. If you want to design a policy to make a civilization set upon itself and fight itself, have half pay, have half don't. And by the way, these situations have arisen in history, and they're never good. I concentrate in the book on 3rd century BC Greece, which set upon itself in much the same fashion we are today. It's a terrible thing. We need to get past it. That's why I support something like a flat tax, or if it was possible, a national consumption tax. But I think that's a bridge too far at this point.
Well, the fair tax or national consumption tax. My fear is it would just be put on top of the regular sales taxes, and then we don't. I do.
Well, then also you'd have to get a constitutional amendment to get rid of the income tax, constitutional amendment to put in the fair tax. That's not likely.
Yeah.
A flat tax is likely, and by the way, as my candidacy in California, I'm running on a flat tax platform.
Well, see, I do like the flat tax as well. So again, if you're just joining us, we're talking with Thomas Del Beccaro. He's the author of The Divided Era. It's out today, and where can they get it?
They can get it at all Barnes & Noble nationwide, and you can get it at Amazon as well, The Divided Era.
And again, Thomas Del Beccaro. I'm looking forward to reading this. I love modern books about modern problems that are based in historical solutions. I think we have a lot to learn from Washington and Monroe and JFK and Reagan. And history is the best teacher.
It is, because it's not what we might do, it's what we actually did. And few things are new in history. Really, what's new has probably been traversed before, even if the details are different. We've been divided before and gotten past it. The question is whether we're going to have good leadership in the next president who understands that you need more unifying goals in order to heal divisions of this magnitude.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thomas Del Beccaro, thedividedera.com for the book. Do you have a personal website or a campaign website you'd like to plug?
Sure. You can go to Del Beccaro, that's DELBECCARO for Senate.com, or politicalvanguard.com is my news site.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to join us today, and hopefully we get a chance to talk to you for your next book.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. There you go, Thomas Del Beccaro, the author of The Divided Era, available today at the usual places. You can go to the bookstore, you can go to Amazon.com, or thedividedera.com for the book. And on that note, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. News Talk 1270, KIML.
That's the bottom line, because Don Carpenter said so. On News Talk 1270, KIML.